Hi everyone, my name is Terry Rysat. I'm a compositing and VFX supervisor working out of Toronto, Canada. I've been working in the industry for almost 10 years and have had the pleasure of working on projects ranging from commercials to television, as well as film. In this course, we're going to create an outdoor environment using V-Ray Scatter in Maya, and then we will render in V-Ray and use Photoshop for our composite. Some of the key takeaways from watching this course include learning how to use V-Ray Scatter in Maya, lighting, shading, and rendering in V-Ray. We're going to learn some additional scattering techniques, and then we'll assemble our render passes in Photoshop to achieve our final look. By the end of the training, we'll have learned how to confidently approach an outdoor environment in Maya and use scattering techniques to achieve a complex result. You'll also learn how to use V-Ray to get professional results and use render passes to get a high quality image. So let's get started with the first lesson. Alright, so before we get too deep into the tutorial, we're going to go ahead and grab some assets off the internet. So the first one up is this Chinese gazebo. So if you go ahead and hop over to 3dland.net and search for Chinese gazebo, this will be one of the items that comes up. Now we're going to get some assets from a couple of different places, so you just want to create a login for it. A free login and then download it as well. It's also going to be a free object. The links will be provided in the tutorial. So once you download that, you can import the FBX into Maya, and we can see here it's a nice complex looking item. You can tell there'll be some nice light hits just by the way that it's been modeled here. And we want to make sure that it's kind of efficient for us, so first thing we want to do is turn off two-sided lighting. And that will let us see if there are any reverse normals on the model. I mean, this one looks pretty good, but I can see already here we just have just this little section that's going to be an issue. So go ahead and switch to face mode. Double click it so it grabs the border of it, and then under normals you want to just go ahead and unlock them and then reverse them, and then also we want to set them to face, and that's what we'll get rid of, all the black faces, and then we'll be in the correct world here. Now you can see that it actually left some hard edges, so again you just want to double click it under normals, set normal angle, and just editing and resetting those default settings will be fine. And then we can see now it's smoothed in with the rest of the model. What we also want to do is get rid of these triangles. So if we go ahead and under mesh, quadrangulate option box, we have to turn a couple of things off for sure. So if I left everything by default on and just applied it, not much is going to change here. We still are left with all those triangles. But if we just turn off keep hard edges and apply it, you'll see this is the correct result that we're going for here. So we just want to identify those pieces. Now you can grab this model as a whole and do it all at once. It'll take a lot of thinking out of Maya to do it, or you can just grab sections at a time. Now you can see this area here is going to need it. So isolate that. This is going to need it as well. So just going ahead and doing that to the entire model will help us get us ready and get it efficient. We definitely want to delete all the history after we do these operations because they can end up being quite heavy. So as far as texturing goes, now it's going to be pretty simple. We're going to use 3 different textures for this. So I have a textured version prepared here, so let me just hide this guy and pull him up. This is using 3 different shaders, actually 4 different shaders, just a desaturated version of one of the shaders. And we can see what we used here to get this. So from cgtextures.com we have an ornament border 0305, and this is used for these white areas here. You see this concrete, and then we also have wood planks bare 0250 as well as wood planks painted 0247. Now just a minor modification to those textures. When we do get them, what we did is in Photoshop just gammaed them down and added this dark brown layer on top of it that's multiplied, and it's just to really bring the texture color down into a much darker area. And also the same thing with the other texture one. That's to get rid of the it had a very reflective sheen on it, and just to bring it down and to the right area as well. So if we go ahead and look at the shader, you can see here now everything we're using is going to be V-Ray materials. Let's take a look at how we're setting this up. So under the diffuse color, we have our Wood Planks Bear diffuse plugged in. And there's a couple of things that we need to do with every texture we bring in. The thing that we need to do for every texture is turn off the filter type. Now, there's Mel scripts I think you can find that will do it all in one shot, or you can just keep on doing it as we bring our textures in. And the reason we want to do this is that V-Ray will actually render it a bit faster if it doesn't have to go through the Maya filtering. So if you imagine we have hundreds of textures and all the filter types are turned off, it's actually going to help us in the long run. It's also going to give us a little bit more of a sharper image as far as the texture goes. So the second thing you want to do is, because we want to work in a linear workflow, is we need to turn on the texture input gamma. So now we're only going to turn on our texture input gamma for our diffuse maps. We're not going to turn them on for our reflection or our glossy maps. So this is our diffuse map here. We would turn on the texture input gamma. Let's go to the bottom here. So we got this texture from the internet. It's 8-bit, so we're going to switch the color space to sRGB because it is in fact an sRGB image. And again, we don't need to do that for the reflection or glossiness, but we're going to do that for our diffuse. Now, we can take a look at a render for it, and we'll get an idea of what it's going to look like in result. So again, very simple texturing. These are all automatic projections or planar projections with the best plane turned on, and just really just doing X, Y, Z planar mapping, no unwrapping involved in here. So once we have this asset, we can go ahead and look at the next one here. So we're going to start filling out with some different types of foliages and grasses. So at xfrog.com, they have this lovely rice plant, and there comes in so many variations. Now we are going to be creating our custom plants, but what I do like specifically about this one is this thick stalk at the bottom, which is really nice to fill out the lower areas when we're close to the ground. And there's so many variations of them that it's just a great thing to have and a great thing to scatter around. So it is free sign up, and you can download it and use it in your project. And I'll show you what it ends up looking like here. So first of all, I'll just bring in one plant out of the bunch of them. And it's going to be the same type of cleanup, so very little that's needed to get it into a working world here. Just need to quadrangulate that as well. And the actual normals are fine to a degree. So let's turn off two-sided lighting, and you'll see that, well, it's fine, but it's kind of not fine. It's black, but it's not. So that's because they are single-faced polygons. So we see it's fine here, this one in particular, but if we flip around, we're doing that so well. We just grab a face. So on this side it's fine, but on this side it's not. So this is where V-Ray materials are going to help us out here. So let me bring in a textured version. This is V-Ray ready. So let's just isolate one of these guys and turn it on. So if I hit textured, it's fine. But if I turn off the two-sided lighting, you'll see, again, we have that issue. So how we get around this is through the V-Ray double-sided material. Let's have a quick look at that. So this is a V-Ray two-sided material, and it requires a front material and a back material. So if we go ahead and look at the front material, we have our diffuse color, and then we also have something a little bit different. It is under a reflection color. So just want to show a different way to kind of control the reflection instead of using a reflection map. Not too concerned with the reflection map for this grass. It's going to be such a filler that I just want to have a little bit more control over the overall reflectivity of it. So what we can do here is create a sampler info node and a ramp. So this is an old, Maya workflow that's been around for a long time. So it's a sampler info node, and then you create a ramp. Oops. And you delete the texture placement. In the ramp, we're just going to turn it into a black and white ramp. So just go ahead and make that white, and make this black. and we're going to plug in to other, and you find that facing ratio of the sampler info node and plug it into the B coordinates. This will give us the nice fall off. So what happens is, you'll see here, I go to my reflection color, drop that ramp into reflection color, and then you're able to have control over the actual fall off of the shader. So if I zoom in on that swatch and start moving the ramp around, you'll see what happens here. So we can actually control this fall off. And the nice thing about this is, we can tighten it up, we can add additional colors in here, so between black and white, and really have some nice complex shaders just by doing that. So it's a nice way to control the fall off. Now, Max users will definitely know, and you can do it in Maya as well, under V-Ray. If you create from a V-Ray plugin texture, and you look for the fall off texture, which is this, you can do it that way as well, and this will give you control over the black and the white, which is kind of like a ramp, but because we can have so much more control during using the ramp and adding additional points, it's kind of a nice way to sort of utilize that. There is a Mel script on Creative Crash that you can do that. You just have to hit the script and it'll create a ramp for you, which is kind of nice. You don't have to hook it up every single time. So we're going to take a look further into the shaders, because in our next lesson, we're going to go ahead and start creating paint effects custom for our scene, as well as shade them. Okay, in this lesson we're going to go ahead and create some custom paint effects for our scene. Let's go ahead and under the paint effects shelf grab our get brush button. What we're looking for under grasses is the field grass button. So let's go ahead and grab that brush, and let's just size up our brush to something nice and big, and just draw out. Now we want to keep the brush size quite big for this. If we go down small and then we draw the brush, we're going to get a lot less paint effects in there and a lot less plants. I mean, we can always increase the density, but we want to just work with a little bit more off the bat and get some more room in here. So this is great, something like that. And right away we want to open up the attribute editor, and under the shape node, let's just go ahead and increase the sample density. So as soon as we do that, you'll see we'll get some more plants being filled in here. And I think we'll just up the smoothing here, and the smoothing is just the smoothing of that curve that this is based on. So it's just going to smooth out the translation between them. Now under Field Grass 1, the attribute editor, this is where we're going to make all of our changes. Let's just get this down a little bit smaller, something like 18, and we can start to have a nice view of how we're going to change this. So if we scroll down under Creation, let's go ahead and get some more thickness in here. So our tubes per step, let's double that to 10. And our start tubes, what we want to do is fill out the center here. So something like 12. That's going to give us some more. And our segments, if I lower the segments, you'll see what's happening here. It's going to be very unsmooth. So let's give it something like 12 and keep them nice and smooth. Now our length min and length max, this is where we're going to change the look quite a bit here. So let's just pull out and start pulling up this length max, something around here, and also increase the length min. So now we already have a very different looking paint effect. Now the cool thing about this is you'll notice that our leaves are still at the bottom here. Just turn on number 5. So we still have our leaves at the bottom. They didn't grow up with the paint effects, so it's kind of neat because what it's going to do is fill out the bottom area of our paint effects plant. So let's go ahead and get back here. So let's just get a nice number here. And if we scroll down to the next section, what we're going to do is just change the width a bit. So let's zoom in. And it's not bad, so I don't think we'll leave tube width 2 the way it is, and let's just increase the width of tube 1. And we can kind of just fine tune this even further with the width scale. And if we just add another point to the ramp here and start to thin it out, you'll see that we have thicker in some areas, thinner in others, and that's the type of look that we want to go for here. It's already a very different looking plant from that field grass, but it still has a field grass vibe about it because, like, you know, something like this, it's because of those little flowers at the end. That's what made it that field grass. So let's go ahead and turn off the flowers and turn on twigs instead. And once we do that, these very angular twigs. So we need to take control over that. So let's go ahead and scroll down right to the twig section. And under the twig angle, let's kill twig angle 2. And you'll see already it's starting to look better. But if I was to lower twig angle 1 completely to 0, you're going to see what's going to happen here. It's going to stay exactly in line with our actual branches. So we don't want that. What we want to do is just go ahead and give a slight attribute to the twig angle. And I think we want to twist them around just so that they're a little off from the actual branch. And the twig stiffness, let's just go ahead and lower that slightly. Just give it some weight and look like it's, it's taking a little bit of a beating from the weather. Alright, so now if we scroll down even further, we have our leaves. So our leaves in cluster is what we're going to do to thicken up the bottom even more. So if I go ahead and I up that to 5, I'm going to get some more in there. And this is going to affect the top area, so we're just going to leave that. But with the leaves and clusters, we're going to affect the bottom here. So I think you can have 5 or 6, and that's going to have 6 leaves per cluster, and it's looking pretty good. Our leaf length, I think, is not bad. I mean, we can just fluff them up a bit. But what a neat attribute that we can have here is the leaf start. And this is what's keeping our leaves at the bottom here because the attribute is so low. So if we increase this, you can see we can slide them up along our paint effects. So what we want to do is, instead of keeping it at the very bottom, let's try and just line them up just a little bit off. And that way, they'll be touching the ground. So great. This is the exact type of plant that we're trying to look for, and the reference for this is this image. This is just complete random wetlands image, and you can just see the wild growth. It's unkept, and there's just things growing in different directions that have been affected by the weather, and just these thin plants. And that's the kind of vibe that I'm trying to do with these plants here. So let's go ahead and duplicate this plant. So if we go under Edit, Duplicate Special, and we want everything to, we just want to turn on Input Graph, and we duplicate Special. So I'll keep our paint effect stroke with us if we do that. So what we can do is go ahead and just change the seed to something random, and then we can also start to make it look different by using that as elevation and the azimuth attributes. So if we go over here and we start to change that up, these are great for randomizing the way this is going to look from plant to plant. Maybe a little bit too much over there. That's good. We'll keep this, and maybe I just want to get less leaves. So let's go down to the bottom here under the leaves. Let's go back to 4 for this guy. Now let's grab this plant and do the same thing, duplicate special. And that area that's really going to make these look different is the elevation and the azimuth. So let's go ahead and find that and change this up. Let's open that up. And then again, let's go ahead and maybe, you know what we'll do with this guy is increase the sample density, and that seed needs to change. Great, so now let's go. We have 3 different types, and let's go ahead again and do this. And change that seed up. Change these attributes. And then do it one more time. Now we can go in and really randomize even further by changing, some of those subcategory attributes. But I think this is going to be okay. We're going to have so many of these scattered across that you're not going to be able to tell too much. So as long as we have a variation, same plant family, but just a variation in them. Maybe this guy's leaning over here. All right, great. So now what we're going to do is let's go ahead and grab them. I'm going to just not grab this guy just yet. I'll just grab these, group them, hide them. And this guy I'm going to duplicate special one more time. Let's move him out of the way, and then let's go ahead and hide our original. We're going to use this as a base for the second type of plant we're going to make. Now again, let's change the seed on here, and we're going to go right down to the twig section here. Because all these attributes that we have set up, I think we can still keep them. But we're going to do something here that's really going to change the look of this paint effect. And this is magic button, branch after twigs. Now, if you watch the plant, once I hit that, it changes it to a completely different style. It's changing the order, obviously, of which it's of the how the growth is happening. And once we do that, you have this really cool looking plant now. You know, it's so different, but it's really based off the exact same plant and the attributes. So we're going to be able to make a whole family of plants by using this. So what we'll do is we'll just tweak this a bit more under the branch section. Let's see if we can try and get some more variation in here. Split size to K. Okay, now what we want to do is go also back up to this area, and I think this is really going to help us spread this out. So let's go here and something like that. And now this is great. This is just a wild growing plant. And I love it. So let's go ahead and see if we can make some more of these. So we'll duplicate special. We'll use him as the original. Let's go ahead and change those attributes again. So we're really quickly be able to make different plants, and doing so by using those default paint effects and really turning them into something else. Like if you remember our original look of the paint effects brush that we used, this field grass, versus what we can turn it into, it's quite amazing. So paint effects can be such a powerful tool for using it for foliage scattering. We can make all our grasses, all our brush from here. So I'm going to go ahead and make some more variations on these, and I'm going to pause the video for a moment, and when I unpause it, we'll have a look at all the different plants that we have. So these are the rest of the paint effects that we'll be using for our scene. So I've created the grass, wind, wild, and using the exact same sort of approach, upping the tube step, the length as well being much longer, and having the variations in them, adjusting the thickness. And then over on this side as well, those are the two that we just did before the pause. And over here, this is actually the corn silk, and so just killing the flower on the corn silk gets rid of the actual corn stalk of it. So again, you're just getting all these nice variation in plants. So this is going to be great to scatter. So in our next lesson, what we're going to do is convert these guys to polygons and start looking at the shading, and we're even going to do a scatter test. Alright, in this lesson we're going to go ahead and finalize our paint effects assets. Let's just go ahead and isolate some of these guys here, maybe just this one. And it's going to be pretty simple. We're just going to go ahead and grab this and modify, convert paint effects to polygons. And let's just pick something low. We don't want the poly limit to go crazy, but we don't want geometry to disappear, so let's go ahead and pick 25,000. We're going to try for quad outputs, and everything may not be quads, but let's go ahead and convert it. And let's isolate that. So it did a good job. These are now polygons. And now let's graph. I'm going to open up the hypershade here, and we can kind of see what's going on. So we have the shaders that came with the conversion, which is the right over here, and it's split into two because there's two. There's the leaf, and then there's the stem. Sorry, this is the leaf. This is the stem. And what we're going to do is switch them over to V-Ray materials, and I have a couple prepared here. Now what these are, if we quickly take a look at them, is V-Ray two-sided materials, and in the front and the back are two different materials. That we looked at this briefly, and we're plugging in the same material to each, and we were using the translucency texture, just the white, the black to gray as sort of a weight on which way we're going to lean towards on the materials. But this time we have a material in the front and a material in the back, and the difference is the diffuse color. They're a little different hue, so there is also a opacity map, and this is going to be what's driving the translucency between the two textures. So depending on what normal spacing camera, it'll use one or the other, and it'll actually blend through it via the a map right here. So if we take a look at our texture really quickly, our material, we will see that in the past, trying to show a few different ways to treat this area of the V-Ray material. We had a sampler info node and a ramp plugged into this one to drive the Fresnel. We also had a reflection color map plugged in, and this time what we're going to do is leave just the reflection color. We'll control the color. We have a map for the glossiness, and we have Fresnel turned on. So we have our diffuse color, and of course filter type is off, and the texture input gamma sRGB is turned on, and then the glossy map is plugged in as well. So I have different hues for these, as well as different colors for the stems, the brown stems. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and convert everything over with the modify convert tool, and I'll start applying the shaders to all the different types of paint effects. So I'm going to pause this, and when we pick up, we'll continue with that. Alright, so now all the paint effects have been converted to polygons, the history has been cleared on them, and the shaders assigned. And it's essentially using those same shaders, just having the variations of them, different colors, different hues, and applying them to the different areas. Like for instance, this one has the brown stems and this one has the green ones, and just mixing up all the variations in the shaders and then applying them to them all. So this is great. We got some nice assets here. So what we're going to do is just do a quick scatter test. So let's go ahead and hide this geometry, create a polygon plane. Let's make that nice and large here. Change the flipping plane on our camera. And let's add some more divisions. We'll go pretty heavy. This is just a test, so let's just go ahead and crank that right up. And I think what we'll do is, just to get some variation, we'll do the transform component, slightly bring it up, and then just get this random attribute as high as we can. Just so it's not going to be perfectly even, we'll have some ups and downs. So our first introduction here to V-Ray Scatter, and that's from R&D Group, is the V-Ray Scatter. So if you head over to their site, you can have a look at it. It's an amazing plugin, very powerful. It makes everything so light to work with. Your file size is nice and light, and you can quickly change attributes. They do also make V-Ray pattern, which is nice for this huge areas of grass or whatever you would like to fill out. And V-Ray Scatter is great for the grasses, but can really be used for anything. And you can take animated proxies in as well. I mean, there's just so much you can do with it that it's not just for foliage, but it is definitely a great plugin to use for foliage. So let me just go ahead and freeze the transformations on this, kill the history, and I'm going to go ahead and create a V-Ray Scatter. So now let's unhide our geometry, isolate it for a minute. I'm just going to grab them all and get them back into the center. Grab them all and get them back into the center. So one thing to mention is that they're all combined now. So there's not two pieces, everything is one piece. So after all the shader assignment is done, each object is now combined. So we don't have those leaves and those stems separately anymore. Let's go ahead and grab them all. I'm just going to bring them, I like to have them all in the same spot, and it really helps for the scaling, just if we have to make any quick tweaks to the size of them, etc. So then I'm going to go ahead and freeze transformations. We want to have these things clean before we scatter. So let's unhide. So now in our outliner, with everything selected, all the geometry is selected, not the groups, but the geometry itself. Let's grab V-Ray Scatter Transform last and open it up. And we're going to add them to the scatter. So now we can see how it's being scattered right across our field here, which is quite nice. And we're just going to do some very quick common things, which is randomize the rotation in 360 degrees, and this is going to depend on our pivot, so definitely want to make sure that the pivot for each of these PaintFX assets, now polygon assets, are at the base of them. So in other words, this tall green one, you can see it's at the base, and it's just quickly sliding the pivots down just to get them down to the bottom here. It doesn't have to be in the exact center. It's okay if it's pivoting around here when we rotate a little bit, but they'd have to be at the bottom. Otherwise, we got to start worrying about offsetting them down too low in the V-Ray scatter, and let's just have them nice and clean before we even do that. So let's go back to our V-Ray scatter node, and we have a random 360, and maybe we're going to tilt them a little bit. The other two axes, and we're going to have a randomized scale, say from 80 to 120. And let's go ahead and create a V-Ray camera. So let's create a camera, look through it, and turn on the physical camera, and just enable it. We're not going to do any tweaking for this scene. This is just a test, and all we want to do in V-Ray is create a sun and sky. You can leave all these defaults, turn on GI, and I am a brute force irradiance map, brute force light cache over the irradiance map kind of person, so I'm going to stick with that. And let me go ahead and set up a render. We can check out this scatter and see how our PaintFX are holding up. Now we don't have to worry about all these guys over here, because if we look, and those are our original objects, they won't show up in the render as long as in the V-Ray scatter node we have hide from render turned on, and it is by default, which is right here. So let me go ahead, pause this, do a render, and let's see how well our new assets are holding up. Okay, so we can see our V-Ray scatter test, and it's a really quick setup here, and you can tell that everything is working very well. I think our assets are going to be very nice. You can see the hue variation between them, as well as you can see those plants that have those leaves at the bottom. So I think our assets are going to be great for the scene. So now in our next lesson, what we're going to do is go ahead and import all our assets into a master scene and begin to set up our composition. Now in this lesson, we're going to take a look at all the assets we'll be using for our scene, as well as laying out a composition. Now, we're familiar with the gazebo. You can see it's just slightly different here. There's some ivy growing on it. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. Over here are our plants for our vegetation that we're going to be scattering. The first row here are those X-Frog plants. These 4 rows are our PaintFX. Now you'll notice that we're seeing some shaded and some not, and that's because these are now V-Ray proxies. So let's just quickly see how we got to the V-Ray proxies. It's not a very complicated a process to go to. So this is our last scene that we had, and everything has been converted to polygons, and our pivots are all dropped to the bottom. And you just go ahead and create a V-Ray proxy, create V-Ray, create proxy. Find a path of where you want it to go. Once you're happy with that, you can adjust the amount of faces in the preview. 5,000 is great. The default is great. So let's go ahead and just create proxy, and then go ahead and do that again. And it's naming them all differently. It's bringing them back into the scene, and you'll notice that they're all being changed. No longer the texturing is going to be shown on there. That's okay. Much rather have other proxies. Then you just keep making them all. Once they're all made into proxies, save this scene out as a proxy, as like a V-Ray scatter geo proxy, and then go ahead and import it into our a sort of assembled scene. I also made some lily pads here because we are going to have water in our scene. It would be nice to spread them top of the water. And we'll look at a different way on how to scatter it, just a different way to do it. and as well as some floating leaves. And this is just one of the plants torn apart and duplicated with the leaves, just a flat, having lay flat, because what we'll do is just spread them across the water as well. And then lastly over here are some cattails, quickly modeled. It's half paint effects and then just some geometry for the top part of it. Now let's go ahead and look at our ivy. So this is created using an ivy generator, and if you Google search an ivy generator, this is what will come up, like Thomas looked. And it's a very cool program, fun to use, and I'm still using Maya 2013. If you're using Maya 2015, I think you can actually grow paint effects against objects. I'm not able to do that, so that's definitely one way you can do it. You can also use the Ivy generator. You can download it for your operating system. It's free of charge. And let's have a look at what it looks like. So all you need to do is prepare your model as an OBJ. You can triangulate it. This one is triangulated. It'll play a bit better if it is. You can actually send it in with quads, but you should probably just try and quadriangulate it there. Now the toughest part about using an Ivy generator is just getting used to the camera controls. You're very used to either Maya, Max, and it's just tough getting used to the navigation around it. But just have a look at the README and you'll be able to figure it out from there. So essentially, all you need to do is pick a spot for grow the ivy. So just double click, and then you go ahead and hit grow. So now, what this program is all about is tweaking these attributes to find the desired look that you need. You might find if we're going like our ivy size, or sorry, our primary weight is low. We try, if it's too low, and try and grow it. They might all bunch up, or this might be very well what we want if we're hanging off the top of a wall, or if we're doing, maybe it's from here. We go ahead and grow. That might be cool, but we want some stuff growing up the top here. So let's go ahead and bring that back up and grow. Too much. Oh, sorry, it's ivy size. Primary weight up to 1. And let's go ahead and grow that again. Now, once you have a result that you're happy with, you need to birth the ivy. And all that means is down here, once we're happy, say we like this, we go ahead and hit birth, and it'll grow the ivy. The default, for the leaf size might be a little too large for a model, so you just want to kind of offset that. So the ivy branch size, let's go to the ivy leaf size. So maybe if we were to birth it like this, it's a little too much. So we don't want this to dominate the model. We just want it to be a secondary thing on the model. So we'll keep the leaves nice and small. Once we're happy with that, we go ahead and export the piece of ivy. And this could be IVA, OBJ, B, C, D. So we export the one, go ahead, pick another spot, grow it again. When we're happy with this, we're going to go ahead and birth them, and then export them again as well. And then we'll assemble everything back in Maya right on top of our gazebo. And then we will have a nice little detail attached to the gazebo just to help a little bit more. Now what we'll do is quickly lay out a composition for what we're going to be doing. Let's go ahead and change the flipping planes again. One. Now the gazebo should technically be the focal point, but we'll position the camera so we're looking at a scatter a little bit more. So let's go ahead and create a camera. A lot of times maybe the scatter is there to help with realism if we're using it for foliage and fill out a scene. But in this case, we want to kind of focus in on it a bit because after all, we're doing a tutorial about the scatter. So let's go ahead. I'm just going to pick a I'm going to pick some resolution that we can, thinking a little bit more panoramic style. So let's just go ahead and go 1600 by 800. And then we want to view within our camera the resolution gate. And then under our display options, let's just make the gate color black and 0 opacity there. So we'll try and do something simple with this. If we turn on our V-Ray physical camera and go under and actually turn it on, treat it as a V-Ray camera under extra V-Ray attributes, we'll turn off specify field of view for mild. We'll just turn it off completely. Let's just change the focal length under the V-Ray camera options here, maybe something like 50, something like 70 even. So we just want to kind of, I think we'll definitely want to be low to the ground because we want to have a look at our scatter nice and close, and maybe we'll just do something simple like a rule of thirds, have it nice, slightly off-centered, staying low to the ground, about here. And this will change depending on how we scatter. Maybe we do a couple camera angles, maybe we're just going to do the one camera angle, but for now this is how we want to generally get it. So from here we'll be able to set lighting and composition of our scatter. So in our next lesson we're going to go ahead and start looking at V-Ray scatter more in-depthly and see the different types of ways that we can use the distribution. So in this lesson, we're going to go ahead and take a look at V-Ray scatter. So let's grab our ground plane, go under Create R&D Group V-Ray Scatter. It'll create a scatter node for us. And I'm just going to start scattering some of the geometry here. So let's maybe just grab these guys. Now it's very important is you need to select them individually, not as the group. Before you scatter, V-Ray scatter won't be able to scatter the group that way. So then in the outliner, I can just go ahead and grab that scatter node I just created. And we're going to go ahead and add them. So there we have our first V-Ray scatter. Now if we start looking at some of these attributes, of course you can adjust the color or what we're seeing for each particular object that we're scattering. And what's nice is you can kind of zone in on the scale for one particular one. So if you didn't want to, this guy was maybe modeled too big, we can control just him rather than the entire scatter as a group here. Probability is how much we want that guy to show up, and radius, height, and penetration, or if we had collision turned on, which is an attribute that comes later on here, and if you don't have it turned on, which we don't need to because we're having grass, so I don't mind if the grass grows on top of each other. But if we had something like trees, we wouldn't want them growing on top of each other, so we turn the collision on and we can just fine tune it with those as well. Mask color variances for color sets, which we're not going to be using. Distribution, this is an important area, so you always want to pick your random seed here. Make sure not everything has the exact same seed. The amount that's going to be rendered at render time, and how many we're seeing in the viewport. Now, instancing type, if we were rendering something over 100,000 instances, then we would be using, if we were rendering 100,000 of the same object, we would want to use instancing. If we're rendering less than that, then we can use node. And the chances are we're not going just for numbers here, we're trying to put together a picture, so we don't need to render insane amounts of them. We just want to render what's going to be good for our render, so we probably won't reach 100,000 with all our scatters. So I'll go ahead and switch that to node. Now the mask area is great here, so what we're going to do here is actually assign where we want the scatter to show up. Colorful will be again a color set, so we're not going to worry about that. So if we select use mask, and we're going to pick a texture, but first thing we're going to do is go ahead and grab our water and our gazebo. Let's bring it onto a new layer, and we're going to hit texture view, and I think I have default material turned on. So it's just going to load up the textures for this gazebo. It's going to take a couple of seconds. Now the nice thing is that Maya has paint tools built into it, so what we're going to do here is assign a Lambert to it, to our water, and then we're going to go to the paint, right click on it, paint, and 3D paint, and we're going to assign a texture to it, and 2K is fine, and then what we'll do is actually flood paint it white. So the idea here is wherever we want the entire thing, wherever it's white, the scatter will show up, so we want the entire thing to be scattered. Then we're going to paint with black, and then we're going to take away the scatter from certain areas. So we don't want it growing around the gazebo, and we want to have a nice little water running up here. And you can do all kinds of pretty great things interactively. Because we can paint in Maya, it's so nice that you can just start painting areas where we don't want it to show up and get instant feedback. So now if we jump back to the master layer, and under our V-Ray scatter node here, let's go ahead and choose texture and pull it up. Oh, wait a minute, we need to actually go back to that layer really quickly here and save it. So let's pick our paint tool, and we have to save the texture. So ground shape color 2. So let's go ahead back to the master layer and choose the V-Ray scatter node. And under the file, we're going to go ahead and grab color 2 node. So now you can see everything I just painted here. Let's hide this over here. It's not showing up in all those areas that we painted black. So it's very nice. We can jump back here. We can pick that paint tool again. Well, pick our geometry, pick the paint tool, and then go ahead and paint some more. Save that texture. Hop back over here. So grab our V-Ray scatter node, and then go ahead and load up the new one that we just saved out, and then we'll get updates to it. So it's a very nice, great interactive way to do it in Maya. So now let's go back to our scatter node and keep on moving down the line here. So you can imagine you can have many of these textures going on. So pattern random is what we'll be using. If you switch over to pattern 1, 2, or 3, this is more UV based. It is actually UV based, so you can go ahead and unlock that, and you can, this might be good for city streets, buildings, or anything you need on a row of trees, etc. But we are going to be using random. Rotation is where we're going to get the randomness in our rotation. We always want to have some sort of randomness. So we're going to maybe have 5 leading in the X, can go over 360 in the Y, and maybe another 5 in the Z. A constant is if we wanted to constantly have a rotation going on. Align to normal. Well, actually align to the normal geometry that we're scattering on. So this has some bumps in it. So if we started to turn that off, you'll see that these scatters will just straighten up. If we turn it on, it'll align with the normals. Okay, so if we go ahead down, scale is very similar to the rotation. We want to have maybe a global scale of say 60 to 120, and maybe you want to stretch in the Y a bit just to get a little bit of height, break up that horizon line. You can of course use a texture for this. Offset, if we start putting lower numbers in here like minus 50 to minus 100, you'll see that the geometry will start offsetting depending on the value that we punch in there, so it'll start pushing through the ground here. And again, you can use texture. So distance to surface borders would be the actual surface that we are scattering on. If I was to put something quite high in here, like so we can actually see it, 5,000, you can see how it's pushing away from the border. It has a nice kind of fall off when you do that. So it might be a good way to have it softly end before our geometry ends, and maybe from one scatter to the next as well might be nice. And you can control it via a ramp as well, and the scale. So distance to curve, you can do the exact same thing, and if we created a curve here, so in your NURBS primitive circle, just size them up so we can see him. You can grab your V-Ray scatter, go ahead and attach that curve, and then again let's do something like 5,000 to start so we can see it, and use. It'll stay away from this curve no matter where we put that, and there'll be fall off to it. So it's nice to have multiple ways because we can use actually double up. We can do it, one from the curve and then one from the actual surface itself. And of course you have ramps to fine tune any of those. Mask curve is another great one because we painted a distribution map, but also for quick fixes, or if we wanted to use anything additional, maybe add a secondary one, we can grab a NURBS curve, attach it, and you'll see wherever the NURBS, it has to be a closed NURBS curve, and wherever that is where the scatter will show up, and you can inverse it as well. Camera can be quite useful as well. What you can do is attach our camera into the V-Ray scatter node, and it'll use the field of view and just scatter in the area where the camera would see. So maybe it's just going to be in this area, and we can have it fall off, which is nice because you don't have to have the scatter that's maybe not going to be seen off camera. Now, where you wouldn't want that would be if we're using the off-screen scatter as a reflection in here. You're not going to see it because obviously it's not going to exist outside of the field of view. And also, if we're animating, maybe turning right to left, we wouldn't want anything popping in. So I think it's safe to not use it, and we don't need to use it for this scene. And then under the render, it's nice to have a tint texture, and you can add some hue variation via this and a V-Ray scatter texture node that's created in the Hypershade. What we can do is use a noise to drive the hue adjustments. So, you know, if we had a big field of grass with maybe a little bit yellow and green, we can actually quickly do so, not having to do it in the texture. We can make a V-Ray scatter texture in the Hypershade and apply it to our shader and have it change the hue. Now, it also does accept proxy animation, which is fabulous. We can have this, you know, whether it's characters or moving grass, etc. You can do that and offset the timing as well. And the viewport is the drawing style, so we can have points, wires, it can be a solid piece, and also the mesh points. And the mesh points are nice for actually visualizing where things will be, especially if you're trying to set up your camera. You know, trying to get maybe a little piece of grass coming into frame, you can actually just visualize it a bit better. When you switch to the solid, it might be a little bit tougher to tell. So that's also a nice thing. And you can also bake all these instances into actual Maya geometry. Now, chances are they'll probably crash out if we did that, especially depending on how many we have. But it's an option to have. Maybe if you're going to render it in a different render, you do that as well. And I'm going to go ahead and start painting up all those different scatters that we have. We do have quite a few geometry. I'll use different types to do it. I'll use the painting of the maps as well as NURBS curves to build up as much as we can in the scatter and get a good composition going. So in the next lesson, we'll go ahead and take a look at all those and start working on our lighting. So in this lesson, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the scatters that were created and start the lighting process. So we have a few scatters going on in here, and you can see how they're painted out. So we have the gazebo kind of open. There's a line of water leading up to it, as well as breakup in the scatter throughout. We have a NURBS curve here that is keeping some of the scatters away from the camera just for composition reasons. So if we open up the outliner here and take a look at our first one, they're all using the same painted scatter map, and except for the cattails. So if we take a look at this, let's see here that in Photoshop just created a layer with clouds on it and used that as a base in Maya, and then painted on top of it using the painting brushes. And that was able to get the composition we wanted. So we want to have water. We want to see some water here as well as along this area. The cattails are just edging the water line, so that's why we're going to see these two white lines. It's wherever the edge of the water is. And of course, always making sure that there's different attributes on each, a little bit of randomization on all of them, and to get some nice breakup overall and for our horizon line. So now let's talk about lighting for a second. Let's hop over. There's a layer called test lighting, and this is the gazebo and the water that is a 50% gray material. And what we want to do is start testing the lighting. So you can see I have a light dome in here. And you can, of course, get your own HDRIs. This one is from Viz People, and they have some free HDR maps you can download, and that's nice sun and clouds. So let's go ahead and jump through camera 1 and start our V-Ray RT. Just want to make sure that we're looking at the right camera when we do so, so I'm going to just start rendering that. And we definitely want to be using a test resolution, say 25%, and then start V-Ray RT here. Let's go ahead and shrink this guy down, out of the way, and now we can begin to see. So if we take a look at our light dome attributes, it's enabled and just dome spherical to start off with. We'll up the subdivision samples for render time, but for now this will work quite well. And if we hop over to the file that we're using for this, let's pull this down, we'll be able to start tweaking the lighting and the direction of the lighting. There is the V-Ray place environment, and if we start to move around, be able to get it into a position that will be nice for our lighting. Now the one thing we need to do obviously is it's very underexposed, so let's grab our camera and scroll down to the extra V-Ray attributes. Let's tear this guy off and start lowering that F number, something like 5, and our shutter speed can drop 100, start getting some more light in here. Let's up our ISO. Even higher, and then also maybe turn off that vignetting, so we'll be able to do that in post. So now we can see what's going on here. Let's talk about linear workflow. So now if we want to use a true linear workflow under the color mapping, linear multiply 111 for the bright, dark, and gamma. And if we want to keep a true linear workflow, we want to turn on don't affect colors, and the textures you'll notice we've been a little more saturated. This would be a true linear workflow where we would take this 32-bit image, tone map it later on. Even if it's blown out in areas, we don't have to worry, we can actually adjust that later on. One thing just to be aware of is this linear workflow button is not what it appears to be. This is if you have an old V-Ray scene, an older build of V-Ray, you bring it into a new scene, you could turn that on and it'll try and make an adjustment to help it with the linear workflow. It's not a replacement for linear workflow. It's not a magic button. Just pretend it doesn't exist unless you're using an old version of V-Ray and hopping into a newer version of V-Ray. But in that case, you would want to actually just rebuild, I would think, to get a true proper linear workflow. We also adjusted our textures with the sRGB node. So right now, this, as it stands, would be the true linear render. But we are going to break the render, the linear workflow. We're going to change this over to Reinhardt because we want to take a look at something here. So we're not going to affect the colors. We'll be okay to have it gamma embedded in the render, and we're going to just look at this burn value, because what we can do here is if we find that our area is overexposed, if we find areas of our renders are overexposed, so say we had a lower F number, so 2.5, it gets a little crazy, 4, and let's try 3. Oops. You see it gets hot in areas. Now what we can do is get that burn value down, and it'll start to tone map it and clamp those values and give us a nice even color, and without all those burns, which is a very powerful thing to have, and you can quickly adjust and not worry so much about burning out the areas with hot lights. Alright, so now if we look at our dome light, so let's get our outliner, there he is, and grab our dome light. It's just finding a position that works nicely. I found that 50 is kind of nice, because what happens is you still see the sun is a little off screen here. We can see by the lens flare, getting some shadow direction, and I think this is a great way where we can start to take a render to the area that we want it to be in. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and add a V-Ray sun, and the V-Ray sun will just be there to help enforce our light direction. So let's open up our render settings and create a sun. And you can see now that it's overexposed, but that's okay. We're going to completely change all this. So let's go ahead and stop V-Ray RT. Let's minimize this stuff. What we want to do is create a camera and have a look through that camera, camera 5. And in the attribute editor, change it to a camera and aim. Now let's turn off our polygons in the viewport. What we want to do is grab the aimer from the camera, so we just do that from our outliner. It's a little bit easier. And we want to just point this in the direction of the sun, and it's right there. You can tell because of the rays that are coming out here. Sometimes, depending on the HDRI, it may be way more exposed in the viewport. So in that case, you can prepare an underexposed version of it to easily find the sun for reference, and then load up the final HDRI for render. So let's put the aimer right about here. And now what we want to do is grab our V-Ray sun. Let's go ahead and jump out and go perspective view here. Zoom out and just pull it up way out here. And what we want to do is see it show up in this viewport. That's it, but we want it's just a little bit of finagling here. There it is. And what we want to do is line up the V-Ray Sun to where our aimer is, right about here. Great. So let's jump back over to camera 1 and let's show polygons again. And then what we want to do is run V-Ray RT. So IPR. Let's move our render globals out of the way for a second. And now we can see additional lighting with our sun. So let's go ahead and tweak that a bit. Let's grab our sun in the outliner and attribute editor. Let's attach this attribute editor back. And let's lower the intensity. Whoops. Let's lower the intensity so it's at 1, and maybe we'll just put it to 0.5. And if we lower the turbidity, the color will change slightly. So we don't want to get it too sunsetty of a color. As a matter of fact, if we raise it just a bit, we'll avoid that as well. Just going to raise it slightly. And let's go ahead and lower this a bit more. And what we want to do and get out of this is this additional shadow, which we did not have. If I turn it off, which is our HDRI, we can contrast up our HDRI and push it much further in the intensity to get a stronger shadow, but it's nice to get some reinforcement from the sun as well. So let's just let this clear up here. Even at 0.1, we'll still get the shadow and the lighting won't be affected too much. So I think we'll leave that at here for now. Let's maybe just take a look at we're at 3. Alright, this looks pretty good. So what we'll do in our next lesson is tweak the lighting even further, but let's start to test the materials. Process. So we have a few scatters going on in here, and you can see how they're painted out. So we have the gazebo kind of open. There's a line of water leading up to it, as well as breakup in the scatter throughout. We have a NURBS curve here that is keeping some of the scatters away from the camera just for composition reasons. So if we open up the outliner here and take a look at our first one, they're all using the same painted scatter map, and except for the cattails. So if we take a look at this, you can see here that in Photoshop just created a layer with clouds on it and used that as a base in Maya, and then painted on top of it using the painting brushes. And that was able to get the composition we wanted. So we want to have water. We want to see some water here as well as along this area. The cattails are just edging the water line, so that's why we're going to see these two white lines. It's wherever the edge of the water is. And of course, always making sure that there's different attributes on each, a little bit of randomization on all of them, and to get some nice breakup overall and for our horizon line. So now let's talk about lighting for a second. Let's hop over. There's a layer called test lighting, and this is the gazebo and the water that is a 50% gray material. And what we want to do is start testing the lighting. So you can see I have a light dome in here. And you can, of course, get your own HDRIs. This one is from Viz People, and they have some free HDR maps you can download, and some nice sun and clouds. Let's go ahead and jump through camera 1 and start our V-Ray RT. Just want to make sure that we're looking at the right camera when we do so, so I'm going to just start rendering that. And we definitely want to be using a test resolution, say 25%, and then start V-Ray RT here. Let's go ahead and shrink this guy down, get him out of the way, and now we can begin to see. So if we take a look at our light dome attributes, it's enabled and just dome spherical to start off with. We'll up the subdivision samples for render time, but for now this will work quite well. And if we hop over to the file that we're using for this, let's pull this down, we'll be able to start tweaking the lighting and the direction of the lighting. there is the V-Ray place environment, and if we start to move around, we'll be able to get it into a position that will be nice for our lighting. Now the one thing we need to do obviously is it's very underexposed, so let's grab our camera and scroll down to the extra V-Ray attributes. Let's tear this guy off and start lowering that F number, something like 5, and our shutter speed can drop 100, start getting some more light in here. Let's up our ISO, even higher, and then also maybe turn off that vignetting, so we'll be able to do that in post. So now we can see what's going on here. Let's talk about linear workflow. So now if we want to use a true linear workflow, under the color mapping, linear multiply 111 for the bright, dark, and gamma. And if we want to keep a true linear workflow, we want to turn on don't affect colors, and the textures, you'll notice we've been a little more saturated. This would be a true linear workflow where we would take this 32-bit image, tone map it later on. Even if it's blown out in areas, we don't have to worry, we can actually adjust that later on. One thing just to be aware of is this linear workflow button is not what it appears to be. This is if you have an old V-Ray scene, an older build of V-Ray, you bring it into a new scene, you could turn that on and it'll try and make an adjustment to help it with the linear workflow. It's not a replacement for linear workflow, it's not a magic button. Just pretend it doesn't exist unless you're using an old version of V-Ray and hopping into a newer version of V-Ray. But in that case, you would want to actually just rebuild, I would think, to get a true proper linear workflow. We also adjusted our textures with the sRGB node. So right now, this, as it stands, will be the true linear render. But we are going to break the render, the linear workflow. We're going to change this over to Reinhardt because we want to take a look at something here. So we're not going to affect the colors. We'll be okay to have it gamma embedded in the render. And we're going to just look at this burn value, because what we can do here is if we find that our area is overexposed, if we find areas of our renders are overexposed, so say we had a lower F number, so 2.5, and it gets a little crazy, 4, and let's try 3. Oops. You see it gets hot in areas. Now what we can do is get that burn value down, and you'll see it'll start to tone map it again, clamp those values and give us a nice even color, and without all those burns, which is a very powerful thing to have, and you can quickly adjust and not worry so much about burning out the areas with hot lights. Alright, so now if we look at our dome light, so let's get our outliner, there he is, and grab our dome light. It's just finding a position that works nicely. I found that 50 is kind of nice, because what happens is you still see the sun is a little off screen here. We can see by the lens flare, getting some shadow direction, and I think this is a great way where we can start to take a render to the area that we want it to be in. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and add a V-Ray sun. And the V-Ray sun will just be there to help enforce our light direction. So let's open up our render settings and create a sun. And you can see now that it's overexposed, but that's okay. We're going to completely change all this. So let's go ahead and stop V-Ray RT. Let's minimize this stuff. What we want to do is create a camera and have a look through that camera, camera 5. And in the attribute editor, change it to a camera and aim. Now let's turn off our polygons in the viewport. What we want to do is grab the aimer from the camera. So we can just do that from our outliner. It's a little bit easier. And we want to just point this in the direction of the sun, and it's right there. You can tell because of the rays that are coming out here. Sometimes, depending on the HDRI, it may be way more exposed in the viewport. So in that case, you can prepare an underexposed version of it to easily find the sun for reference, and then load up the final HDRI for render. So let's put the aimer right about here. And now what we want to do is grab our V-Ray sun. Go ahead and jump out and go in perspective view here. Zoom out and just pull it up way out here. And what we want to do is see it show up in this viewport. That's good, but we want let's just load it up finagling here. There it is. And what we want to do is line up the V-Ray sun to where our aimer is, right about here. Great. Now let's jump back over to camera 1 and let's show polygons again. And then what we want to do is run V-Ray RT. So IPR. Let's move our render globals out of the way for a second. And now we can see additional lighting with our sun. So let's go ahead and tweak that a bit. Let's grab our sun in the outliner and attribute editor. Let's attach this attribute editor back. And let's lower the intensity. Whoops. Let's lower the intensity so it's at 1, and maybe we'll just put it to 0.5. And if we lower the turbidity, the color will change slightly. So we don't want to get it too sunsetty of a color. As a matter of fact, if we raise it just a bit, we'll avoid that as well. Just going to raise it slightly. And let's go ahead and lower this even a bit more. And what we want to do and get out of this is this additional shadow, which we did not have. If I turn it off, which is our HDRI, we can contrast up our HDRI and push it much further in the intensity to get a stronger shadow, but it's nice to get some reinforcement from the sun as well. So let's just let this clear up here. Even at 0.1, we'll still get the shadow and the lighting won't be affected too much. So I think we'll leave that at here for now. So we just take a look at we're at 3. Alright, this looks pretty good. So what we'll do in our next lesson is tweak the lighting even further, but let's start to test the materials. Okay, in this lesson we're going to go ahead and commit to our lighting as well as make sure that our shaders are working as expected. So I have another render layer here, and it's lighting 2, and it's got, this time all the scatters are in it, everything's in it, and it's got the 50% gray material override. Let's go ahead and jump to camera 1, and let's do a quick render. And while this is rendering, I'll just pull up the render settings, because we can do a couple of things as V-Ray is rendering, which is quite nice. So the samples are very low for these tests. We have 1 and 2 and a threshold of 0.01, and this is going to help us render very quickly. It'll be noisy, but we'll get an overall feedback. And we're using brute force, light cache, and very low subdivisions on the brute force. A lower number of passes than there are CPUs, as well as very low subdivisions. And the same thing for the DMC sampler, quite low, just so we can get this feedback. And you can see here, pretty good, pretty happy with the lighting here. We can see the shadows that are happening from the V-Ray sun. The scatter is working out quite nicely, and the gazebo looks good. I think if anything, we're going to cut back on the scatters in this area and just try to see a bit more of the water, and also to be aware of it, this going to need some breakup. So I might manually place some of those proxies just in areas here so we don't see this harsh kind of line. Just try and fudge it a bit by putting some by putting some proxies in front of it as well. Alright, so now what we can do is, I want to show just a different way we can also help scatter some additional geometry in the scene. We still have those lily pads and those floating grass. So there's this Mel script, it's SP Paint 3D, and essentially we'll be able to paint with geometry from it. So if I go ahead and grab our ground, and we're going to add that as our target surface. We're going to paint on that. And if you get an error, we have an error, and that's because there's so many inputs coming in from the V-Ray scatters. I'm just going to duplicate it, hide it, and add that one instead, and that will be clearing. And then let's go ahead and I'm going to add, going to grab in the outliner these lily pads. And we'll add those, and we're just going to have some rotation, 0 to 360 randomization on that, and as well as the scale, we want to up that 0.6. Actually, uniform is checked, so then what we'll be able to do is actually a couple of things. So let me hide the scatter nodes so we can actually see a little bit clearer here. So we'll just find those, and that will be under our scatters here. And then what we can do is actually use the paint tool, and then you'll see here that the lily pads, put in the wireframe, you'll see that better. You can just sort of paint them on, which is very nice and a fun way to do it as well. You can also place them one by one and put them in exactly the areas that we want. And because they are duplicates, we can actually just grab them after if some of them aren't working, move them around. So it's a nice way to go through the camera view, and then maybe we can paint some, put some over here. We want a couple of them over here leading up to the gazebo, which is a quite nice way and fun way I thought it would also show on how you can just add these little touches to your scene. Okay, so I do have some of those set up. Let me just delete those guys that I just made here. And I have some already in place, so I'll delete these guys and turn them on. So we did that with the 4 lily pads as well as the floating grass. Let's unhide our scatter nodes. So it's all about composition. Now let's go ahead and let's do a render in our master layer now, and it's going to be low resolution again. What I want to do here is make sure our materials are working as expected. We don't have them all together at the same time. We haven't rendered them out yet. So this way we'll be able to tell if everything is working and if anything needs tweaking. And for the final render, we definitely want to turn the visibility off in the light dome. For now, we'll just keep it on. Nice, some grass dipping into frame, which is great. The gazebo is looking good at this point. The nice reflectivity off the top, and you can see the sheen on there. And let me, I was going to pause it here, but now we can actually see what's going on. So I could tell right off the bat the paint effects is actually a little too reflective. You can see those little dots over here, and I think that's going to be a little bit too much to commit to in the render. I'd rather have control over that. And so what I'll do is actually knock back the reflectivity way down for all those, and we are going to render a reflection pass, so we'll be able to paint the reflection back in. The water is a very simple water shader. It's holding up nicely. Everything looks good. Our lily pads are floating on top. We got our cattails going on here, and yeah, so definitely want to break up this area. It's a little probably too much. You want to see some more water over here. Not just be a quick adjustment to the scatter map, a quick paint in that area. Other than that, everything looks good. So I think what we'll do in the next lesson is go ahead, I'll make those tweaks in between to the shaders. We're going to set up some V-Ray properties. We're going to finalize our render settings, and as well as set up our render elements. In this lesson, we're going to set up our V-Ray object properties, render elements, as well as finalize our render settings. Let's go ahead and grab our outliner. And we have everything nice and organized now, and let's go ahead and start deciding what we want to isolate and get additional color passes for. So let's go ahead and choose our object properties and tear this off and apply a single object property. And if we go to, this will be called water, and if we go to the attribute editor, what we want to do is actually override the object ID and choose 1. And now maybe we want to open our scatter geo, and all the rice we want to have isolated as well. So we'll apply a single object property and make that 2. We want to just make sure we're naming these properties. And maybe we're going to have to group something. So say we want the wide grass, the tall green, and the tall brown. Apply a single object to those, just so we can have color correction control in post and be able to isolate those very quickly. Let's call this PFX. This will be number 3. Just want to go ahead and do that for the lily pads, the gazebo, parts of the gazebo, the cattails, the floating grass, just so we have all these individual items grouped and colored the same for post-production. Now if we open up our render settings, all we need to do with that is grab our multi-matte, add that, and then start turning on. So 1 was the water, 2 is the rice, 3 is the paint effects. When we render it out, we'll have an additional pass with all these isolated as solid colors. Now, what we want to do also is like have a material ID pass, and if we go under a rendering, we would either have to do that one by one as we were creating a material, or we can do it all at once. So there's going to be a little bit of a catch-22 with this. Now, there are ML scripts that can do this all at once. So if I'm using this Deeks V-Ray Fast, and if you go to Tools, Material ID, we can add a material ID on all the materials, as well as randomize them for all the materials as well. So now every material in our scene has a material ID and has a random color on it. So the catch-22 here is that once we do that, we have these two-sided materials. And the two-sided material will have a material ID. Our grass front, the materials that we're using for our front and back are going to have a material ID. And if we're using ones with two different materials on them, they're going to have different material IDs as well. So when you get all of these combined and it's on the same piece of geometry, they're just going to probably show white. So it's not going to be really helpful. Also, our V-Ray proxies are under the same sort of situation. So what we want to do in this is actually use the object ID on all, and we're going to add them on all meshes, and then also randomize them on all the meshes as well. This way we'll be able to avoid that problem under the material ID and get those separate isolations from the object ID. So let's go ahead and add a object ID pass, material ID pass. Then we're also going to add our Z depth pass, and I have this cube set up in the screen in the scene, and it's just at the very back of our scene. And the reason why is so we can know how far to set the depth white in our Z depth pass. So if I select a cube, I have our object details up on the heads-up display, and it's 46,669. So if we grab our Z depth, we can just go ahead and get 47,000. So some additional passes that we're going to want to use. We're going to use the beauty as our base layer, but we're going to add the reflection on here. Maybe make this bigger. Refraction, specular to help with our lighting direction. GI, maybe for some lower lit areas, we can just add some GI back in there. And we're going to want the extra texture, and the extra texture we'll use for the ambient occlusion. So under the extra texture, let's go ahead and add a V-Ray dirt to the texture. Our scene is quite large, so I think a radius of 20 is probably a good place to start. I'm going to have to render it to make sure it's okay. I want high subdivisions on this guy as well. So now let's just go ahead and do a render and see what we're getting so far. Now let's pull up our render settings, because we are going to also see if we need any additional passes here. I think we might be okay. This will be enough to get us going. We're going to have definitely more material, the multi-matte textures in here. So as soon as this gets going, we'll be able to see if our Z depth is working. And it's working as expected. That's great. So that cube helps us just quickly figure out how far we need to be. We have our multi-matte, which the first three objects that we put in there. So we have our water, grass, those paint effects ones. We can quickly isolate later on if we want to do some corrections individually. Our object ID, so it's going to look a little messy, but this is going to be very helpful if we want to color correct certain areas. We can quickly pick colors as well, and this is going to help us out with our proxies. Material ID, so this is what happened with those V-Ray two-sided materials and the proxies as well, is there's just too many shading inputs. So when we put the material ID globally, it kind of took us back because of that. But again, we can isolate that with multi-mattes and with the object ID, so it's not a huge deal. Reflection is looking good, so everything has a reflection in here. We'll be able to paint back the reflections that we had in where really lowered them. And just finishing up here, the refraction. So I don't know if we're going to need this necessarily, but we do have a refraction. Maybe we want to get some highlight hits in the water. and specular, so we can see our lighting direction, and that's going to be very helpful to just reinforce the lighting direction. And the GI, just in case there are some lower lit areas, we can also paint them back in. And let's delete that cube back there that's showing up in our render. Great. So now we can set up our final render settings for the render. So the anti-aliasing filter, I mean, this is all personal preference. Some are sharper than others. I don't mind the area at the default. You can use that, and any additional sharpening we'll do in Photoshop. The adaptive DMC, we're going to up this, so I think a minimum of 1 and 16, maybe actually, yeah, 1 and 16 should be okay. We do have a lot of thin lines in here, so maybe 1 and 24 will be safer. Our threshold, this is where we're really going to clean up our render, and we do have some low sampling on our materials as far as the reflection and refraction goes, but this will help us clean this up tremendously. So it's going to be really low sampling here. Let's put this back to 16. Our indirect illumination, we're using brute force and light cache. And for our brute force, let's up our subdivisions to about 64. Depth is the amount of bounces. So, I mean, we're outdoors. I think 3 might be overkill. If anything, if it's a little dark in here, we'll paint it back in. So I don't think we're going to need more than the 1. We have 12 processors in this computer. And for the subdivisions of the light cache, let's bump them up to, say, 2,000. Our adaptive threshold amount, again, let's get this really low. We're going to get a nice clean render out of it. We're going to suffer a bit with the render time, but that's okay. It's for a still, so we'll be able to just let it render and come back to it later on. The dynamic memory limit, you might want to change according to the amount of RAM that you have in your computer. So I think we're ready to commit to our final render. I'm going to go ahead and set up the rest of the multi-mats for this. Make sure that all the geometry is in place, and maybe add a couple of those V-Ray proxies we were talking earlier, just to cut off any harsh lines that the scatter might be producing. In other words, it's just grass that's being shoved into the water. We want to make it look like a little bit of a soft fall off. And in our next lesson, what we'll do is go ahead and examine our render passes. In this lesson, we're going to go ahead and take a look at all of our render passes, as well as start to composite the final image here. So I've drag and dropped all of our passes in here, and you can see them all lined up in our layer palette here. And the mode has been changed to 16-bit because we leave it at 32-bit, we're going to be missing quite a few functions that we'll be able to do in Photoshop that can only work with 16-bit or lower. So we'll drop it down. We still have a huge color range, so we should be okay. So let's go ahead and take a exposure. Let's put an exposure node on here. And what I'm going to try and do here is keep everything separated. So our color will be here, and the exposure node will have a clipping mask just for the color layer. And even in our sky, even though they'll share the same gamma, we'll also have a clipping mask. And the reason being is just in case we want to change the gamma, say, of the color and not want to affect the sky, etc. So let's go ahead and put that there as well. We've got a clipping. And we can see, now we can see our beauty pass, and everything is working as expected. Low reflections that we'll paint back in. Everything, we have these little proxies here covering up the edge of the grass. That's something to note. I ended up rendering it at more of a square resolution with the intent of cropping at some point. So we'll just be able to fix the composition a bit in here, or maybe just leave it the way it is. So we'll see how that works out. Now let's take a look at all of our passes. Okay, so we have our sky, our GI. Now, of course, this is going to need also the exposure node. So what I'll do is I'll just put at the top for now exposure, so we can just see them properly, the correct gamma here. Alright, so we have our global illumination, which is great. We can actually get some color back into the grass if necessary, and also if it's too dark in certain areas, we can paint this back in here. Our material ID, and it's just a nice one to quickly pick sections of it. We know that our proxies and two-sided material didn't work out so much on that, but we also have the multi-mats for that. So this was the first one we made. Got 3 mats per channel, so we have our water in this one, the rice, and I believe the grass. And the next one we have all of our paint effects, our cattails, our floating grass. And the third one, the lily pads, and as well as the gazebo. And of course we have our object ID, so we can go ahead and pick anything from here as well, so that came in very handy. Our reflection node is looking good, so we can start painting back some of this reflection in. Maybe even just a global reflection. I really like what's happening on the roof with this reflection, so maybe we want to see some more of that. Refraction node, probably not going to use the refraction node, but it doesn't hurt to have it, so just in case you want to get some highlights here. And specular, and this is where we can really see our lighting direction, so we'll see how it's going to look overall. I am going to use the sky that's rendered with the HDRI, which feels a little more overcasty, but at the same time it might be nice just to bring some of this back in. So let's turn on our color, and let's kill this exposure node off the top here. And I think we're already with the color layer. It might be useful to just bring this gamut down a bit more here. That's the sky. Oops. Let me just go ahead and lower that a bit. Because we are going to be bringing passes in back on top, it's going to naturally get brighter. Like if we started to go ahead with our reflection, let's bring our reflection guy out. And group him. Turn him on. And we go ahead and screen. Naturally the image is going to get brighter as well, so let's add an exposure node on this. And again, 4x4. And I kind of like this, so let's just start to dial it back and then, oops, start to dial this back. Let's see where we can bring it in here. So maybe something like around this area. Now what I'd like to do also is just mask this entire group with black, and then we'll get a paintbrush. Then we can start painting back in the reflection where we'd like to see it here. You know, especially up on the roof. And maybe less in the areas that are closer to the ground here. Oops. Let me just soften this up, so let's pick a nice brush with a soft edge here. This way we can selectively paint our reflection in. And the color I can see, they have this fringe on the edge here, and this is going to be, we're just going to control click the layer itself and mask it out. We do have an alpha to do that. So I'll just do it right in the layer here. Get rid of that fringe. And then let's go ahead and have a look at, let's see if we can bring some of this refraction back in here. So let's pull him out. And we'll do the same style for this, so let's start to get organized. We want our sky grouped. That'll be our sky. We have our color. And we're just going to start coloring these guys as well. This is our reflection. And I think we're going to might add another reflection just to strengthen that roof reflection here. This is going to be our refract. And let's go ahead and add a gamma node, the exposure. And click that. Okay, so oops. 4x4. Maybe this guy will be. So even something like an overlay would be nice. We could try the screen. It does some nice things to the edges of the water. I don't know if it's going to be 100% necessary, but because we are losing some bits. Maybe if you just want to bring back some of this area in here, it might be useful, but for now I'm actually going to leave it off. Okay, so let's see what else we can start with here. Our V-Ray dirt is going to be a nice one to do as well. So what's nice about the dirt, I'll just name this AO. We're going to multiply this through. We don't necessarily have 100% opacity on this one. We just want to bring in a little bit of it, but we have to watch for, and I'll start with 100 just so we can see it, is the areas where there's too much occlusion going on. So I'm going to mask this and just start painting away from those areas that have maybe too much. There's a few here. And then there we go. So those areas were just a little problematic. And then we can start cutting back the overall effect of the occlusion. So our sky, I think, the sky needs some cleanup. There's a lens flare still in there. Oh, I have my exposure turned off. There we go. The sky needs some cleanup. There's some lens flare in here. This is not a huge deal, and we do have these trees, but don't want to have it just this empty horizon line. So I found some nice trees you can use from 3D Total. They have a nice section where you can download some items for matte painting. And these are some trees that seem to work well with this scene. And what we can do is just bring them up, cover those trees, but also just give us, a nice fill out for the back of this. So I think this overall is the direction we're going to go with. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and start building up the composite more, and then we'll take a look at it. In the next lesson, we'll see how far it's gone, and then we're going to start taking it further to the color correction phase. In this lesson, we're going to go ahead and take a look at how the image has progressed and how we got to this stage. So we know we have our sky, trees, and color, and now our sky has actually been stretched out. And the reason being is the sky that got rendered out from our actual HDRI is a little bit too much of a hot spot here, and we can always tone that down, but I think it's always going to be a focal point, so I'd rather just get it out of the way. And because they are clouds, you can stretch them out, and it's not going to be too noticeable of a difference. So give us this overall, there is some sun going on, there's cloud breakage, but for the most part it's overcasty as well, which is kind of nice. So we have our sky, trees, and color, and then our reflection. Now we'll see how much our reflection contributes when I turn this off. So we have the gamma on the Beauty Pass is turned down beyond the 0.454. We're bringing the reflection back in to brighten up the image. And it's got duplicated about 4 times, and there's different areas where it's painted in a little hotter than others. And then a global one where there's one that's just painted away as well. This really helps brighten up the image and give us this nice highlights and hits here. The specular, we can turn it on and off, and you'll see it's very subtle. We're putting it back into the roof, as well as some areas in the far ground of the grass. We have some grime painted in, and this is to get it all over the gazebo here, so just to age up the gazebo a bit and give it just a little bit of wear and tear. And this texture is grabbed from CG Textures, there's quite a few, and then we can just start painting in. We use that material ID to isolate those areas, or object ID to quickly isolate where we want each one, so it's very handy passes to have, of course. Then we have our refraction pass. Now the refraction pass is really just for this area here. So it's using an overlay and bringing in some texture in here, a little bit more of a harsh texture, so you can see a bit more detail in here, and left some over here as well. See that? But not painted up over here, just for the foreground. Our GI, now our GI is turned on, and it's globally kind of brightening up all the scattering of the greenery here. And it's almost giving it this overall even tone, which is quite nice, because what it does is just gives it a little bit of a boost, so it feels a little bit brighter, a little sunnier. Our occlusion, we already painted in the last lesson. And then we have some fog back here. So how the fog is working, we have to paint away a bit more in this area, is let's go ahead and rebuild the fog. So if I turn on the Z depth and create a new layer, and let's use a clouds to fill in the layer, and we're going to group this layer as well. We'll go ahead and turn it off. Grab our Z-depth pass and select the color range. We can go ahead and open up the fuzziness. We'll get a bit more depth out of it, and we can kind of select how far we want our fog to show. So if I select this area, and then I'm going to go ahead, turn on the clouds, and then mask them as well. Sorry, let's keep that on, turn off our Z-depth. We can see where the fog is coming in. So we're concerned about this area where it is. We'll paint away up here. So let's go ahead and grab a brush. Let's get it away from the sky. Down here. Something like this. Now, you can screen this through to get the full effect and then cut back on it. And that will give us this nice additional fog. And we can do sort of just paint back in on top of the roof of the gazebo to give it a little bit less contrast and the farther away in. It's almost like an edge wrap. Okay, so let's go ahead and turn that off now. And we have our passes intact. So all this has been grouped into the build group, and this is going to stay intact, so we're non-destructive. We can always go back and change anything if we want to. And in this section here, we just have a little bit of a dirty lens texture. That's just to add a little bit of texture to the image in a spot where it felt nice, as well as some particles, and you can see them all around here. And the particles could be like a swarm or of something just flying around, and just adds a nice little touch on top of the water especially. So all these have been grouped into composite. And so now what we want to do, again, always working non-destructive, is let's duplicate this layer, and we're going to go ahead and flatten it as well. What we want to do here is add some depth of field. So I'll put this below the particles and lens dirt, and then what I'm going to do is go ahead and select, we're going to blur it, so we'll go to blur and we'll go to lens blur. So our image is pretty wide because we have to crop it because we stretched out the sky over here, and we'll give it a radius of 6. So now we have this blurry image. So again, our Z-depth will come in handy. What we'll do is turn it on and go ahead and select the color range. This time we want something tight, so we'll go to the front of the image over here and lower that fuzziness. So maybe we'll just come up to about here. We'll say alright. And then we'll turn on this blurry image and then mask that as well. So now we have some nice depth of field. We have some defocusing the front of the image, and that turns into a sharpened image. Let's go ahead and name this depth of field. Now again, we'll take this image, we will copy it, and we're going to flatten it. And we'll start to do some color correction on it, and it's going to be very simple soft lighting. And we're going to dial back the opacity all the way down. Then we'll go ahead and start to reintroduce it just to get this additional contrast and color. So the image is coming along quite nicely, and in our next lesson what we're going to do is take a look at the camera raw filter in Photoshop. It's very powerful, and we'll finalize the color correction and finalize our image. So in this lesson, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the camera raw filter, get some final color correction, and finalize our image. So let's go ahead and still work non-destructively. We could turn this into a smart object. However, I'm trying to keep the file size down a bit, so I'm just going to duplicate these, and then I will flatten them out. So now we'll just turn these guys off. And I think we're going to have to crop this image because our sky, you can see it back here. So let's go ahead and crop it. And let's jump into the filter and camera raw filter. So now this is such a powerful tool. You can completely change the whole look of your image just by using this. Camera Raw, obviously for when you bring in raw photos off your DSLR. However, we're able to use it in our renders because we have that huge bit depth in it as well. So I mean, we can just go ahead and start upping the exposure, adding some more contrast. We can cut back on the highlights, which is quite nice. We can really bring our sky back in if it's gone way too much. I don't mind doing a little bit of an overexposed image for this, so we can cut back too much. We can maybe, if we find our shadows are getting a little too dark, we can up them a bit as well. See how it really brings out some areas. And we pump up our whites even further. And we can, you can also, if you want to crush the image a bit, you can also just pull the blacks down. In this section over here, we have everything to do with the overall saturation, the vibrance, saturation, and clarity. Maybe we'll desaturate just a bit. And of course, you have your temperature and tint. Now the tone curve is quite nice because you can actually add your own points, but there's a parametric one, so you can kind of see what's happening with the curve when you do add those points. And for instance, we'll pump up the highlights, maybe recreate a bit of that S-curve that we were doing in V-Ray there. Our image is very contrasty, very punchy, which is fine. And now let's go ahead and add some sharpening. So I want to zoom in here and just, what we don't want to do is get the grass falling apart. If we sharpen it too much, our grass is going to fall apart. So we can kind of balance it out with the radius and detail, but I think just a minor bit of sharpening will be the trick here as well. Alright, let's go ahead and fit into view. And then this area is so powerful, the hue, saturation, and luminance, because we can have an overall global effect on everything at once rather than, just having all these tools in one area is really nice and a quick way to do it. To get instant feedback. So maybe we want to change the hue of our sky there, or even the greens, we can start pushing them, get a more, almost a fall feeling here. We'll leave these at default. Then you can do the same with the saturation. So if our greens are oversaturated, we can bring all our scatters down, and maybe the sky pump a little bit more blue into that. I believe the greens as is, they're looking pretty good, but we'll up the sky color. And of course you can do the same with the luminance. We can add some more light, trim back on the light, and I think we'll trim back just a bit on the green. It's getting a little too hot. And then you have your split toning, which you can completely change the look and give it a sort of a two-toning color there. So we can choose our highlights and our shadows and just start introducing some saturation into it. You can start to see the blue that's taking over all the spots of the shadow, as well as if we start introducing into the highlights as well. So it's kind of nice. I'm going to leave some of that blue in there. And you have your lens correction, chromatic aberration, and we're not going to add any to this image. We'll leave it as is. And you also have, if you have any distortion in the image, and of course some grain. So let's start pumping some grain into it, and then just kind of back. That looks about fine. And some vignetting as well. And the camera calibration is also another great way to sort of set the tone for the RGB. So we can pull our blue here, maybe saturate a bit more. Same thing with the greens. Let's do this here and just desaturate the greens. No, let's leave the greens. So we'll just get gradually adding more blue into this image. It's giving it this nice feel. And of course you can save this out to a preset. So now what we can also do is kind of spot correct, which is so powerful also, is this adjustment brush. So maybe I want to just add a little bit more highlight hits to the roof here. And just by doing that, maybe one over here, we can also adjust it, really pump it up or pump it down. So I think I'll just add a little bit of exposure to there. And if we zoom into this image, let's go ahead and get closer to underneath the roof here. We'll add a new one. And I think we'll just paint along here. Let's just start to see just so we could see a little bit better underneath there. That's great. And now, like maybe we feel like this area is too dark over here, we can just grab a brush, size it up a bit, paint that area, and start lifting the shadows. Like that. And let's add another one and start taking away some of these very hot highlights. So if I paint over here, I'll actually go the other way so I won't overexpose it. What we want to do is, oh, oops, I need to actually add that. So I'm going to add a new one and then paint. But we don't want to overexpose this, so let's go down. Lower the shadows, and also what we want to do now is cut the highlights away. That's what we're looking to do. So we can maybe take away some of this fog back here. Like it's still there, but just toned down, as well as here, and some of the highlights on the grass. Let's get rid of that last one. Okay, so I'm okay with this. I think maybe just a little bit more vignetting. Let's get it a little harsher. And I'm going to say back to the saturation. Just drop this down a bit. Okay. All right, so we can see the difference between before and after. So let's turn this on. So this is what we had before, which on its own, it stands on its own. There's absolutely no need to go even further, maybe just a little vignetting and grain on this. But then also, just by taking to that camera raw, we can completely change the overall tone and look of this image. So that wraps up the tutorial. It's been great doing the tutorial, and I hope that you've been able to be more comfortable with V-Ray Scatter and Maya and take this image to the end in Photoshop. Thank you for watching.